Jane Remover has just made a massive contender for Album of the Year with her most recent project, Revengeseekerz. And one of the main reasons this album is so fresh and unique is its incredible self-made production. And you know how it is over here? Whenever we hear a really well-produced album, we gotta break it down. So today, I'm sparing no details and revealing everything you need to know about the genius production of Jane Remover's Revengeseekerz. And this includes her use of rage production, her implementation of some electronic music subgenres, the use of halftime breakdowns, and her use of sampled sound effects. So with that being said, the first portion of her production that I want to cover is the rage aspects. And if you want to stay true to the melodies in this style, you're going to want to start with some sort of arpeggio. Now, I just handmade this arpeggio within FL Studio using its arpeggiator feature. And if you don't know what that is, you just hit Alt-A on any chord progression you have, and it'll bring up the arpeggiator. And for this, I'm just playing a basic progression going from the 1 to the 5, making use of standard triads. And for pretty much every single melodic aspect of this beat, I'm making use of stock Serum 2 presets. You don't have to specifically use Serum 2 or even Serum 1, but you're going to want to use some type of synthesizer. So with that being said, this is what the arpeggio sounds like. Now, once you have your arpeggio, you're going to want to build upon it with other various synths. And some things I recommend making use of are fifth harmonies. So you're just going to take the root notes of your progression and play the fifths of the chords. As well as rhythmic plucks. And just playing the fifth of your chords. The rage sections of her production are mainly drum and rhythm focused, so you don't really need to spend too much time focusing on your melody, but just make sure you're making use of arpeggios. That's pretty much essential. So with that being said, this is what our melody sounds like in its entirety. So now that we've covered the melody, let's go over the drums portion of her rage production. And before I get into this, I want to mention that nearly every single drum sound used in the rage section of this beat is from my Deathbound drum kit. The kit contains over 180 completely custom drum sounds, meaning that there is 0 recycled sounds. They were all made in Serum, and all of them are perfect for making beats in the style of Jane Remover, 2 Hollis, Ken Carson, Playboi Carti, just any kind of loud, blown out beats. So if you like the drum sounds that you hear and you want them for yourself, check it out in the description down below. But yeah, enough of this. Let's get into the drums. And pretty much all you want to focus on for these drums is just having them be as busy and noisy as possible. So firstly, you're going to want to throw down a loud ass 808 pattern that does not take any breaks. Secondly, to add to that busyness, you're going to want to throw down a 16th note hi-hat pattern. On top of that, to further add to the busyness, you're going to want a snare, making use of some snare rolls. Aside from that, to keep things interesting during the rage portion of your beats, you're going to want to throw down things like impacts and risers, and also make use of moments of silence. So with that being said, if you're making use of an arpeggiated melody, some super busy blown out drums, and integrating sound effects, this is what your rage portion should sound like. So that's going to completely cover the rage portion of her production. And what I want to get into next is by far my favorite aspect of her more recent production. And that is the integration of various EDM subgenres. And I'm going to be going over 3 different subgenres that are incredibly prevalent in her newest album. And the first of which is going to be Breakcore. Now, if there's any kind of moment of downtime in your beats where you want to build up to another massive drop, you're going to want to make use of either Breakcore or like jungle type of drum loops. And this is something that's seen in Turn Up or Die.
Listen.
Give them bitches proper send-offs. Explosive bitch blows head off.
So with that being said, I just have the super standard amen break repeating itself. And then I also have moments of stutters and chops just to keep things interesting. And we're just using those all throughout this build-up portion of the beat. And this portion of the beat is a pretty standard EDM build-up. It's not really specific to Jane's style, so I'm not really going to go too deeply into it. But we are going to go deeply into the next genre that she likes to integrate, which is dance. And the integration of this genre is prevalent in both Psychoboost, featuring Danny Brown, and Professional Vengeance. Now for this section, I wanted it to start as a more dark style, similar to Psychoboost, and then evolve into a more happy and bright style, similar to Professional Vengeance. So if you want to make stuff similar in those styles, here's what you're going to want to make use of. Firstly, you're going to want to make use of a 4 on the floor kick pattern. Essentially, it just means it's hitting on every single downbeat. Boom, 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 boom. As well as that, I recommend making use of some kind of crazy bass ARP or sequence. Yet again, I'm using Serum 2 and I'm using the laser bass preset. And for pretty much any kind of bass or melodic aspect of these beats, you're gonna wanna absolutely spam OTT on them. If you don't have OTT, literally get it right now. It's free to download and it makes everything just sound better. So with that being said, this is what our bass sounds like. Aside from that, to really tap into that dance energy, you're gonna wanna throw down open hats or hi-hats hitting on the off beats of every single note. So the kicks are hitting on the down beats, whereas the open hats are hitting on the off beats, so. And for these more dark portions, the only thing that you're going to want to make use of are those basses and drums. But if you're looking for a more bright and happy style dance section, I heavily recommend reintroducing and making use of melodic aspects from the rage section of your beat. This is not only going to make this section more melodic, but it's also going to create a sense of theme throughout the beat, intertwining the different sections. And finally, similar to the rage section, you're going to want to make use of moments of silence and absolutely spam sound effects like impacts, risers, video game sound effects, stuff of that nature. So with that being said, this is what the dance portion of our beat sounds like. And final subgenre that I want to cover that is very prevalent in Revengeseekerz is hardstyle or jump style. And something I've noticed yet again in Psychoboost is the use of hardstyle type of kicks to build energy in your track. So to transition from the dance section to the next section of our beat, I have this downtime section right here, making use of this really harsh hardstyle kick. And if you're looking for a good hardstyle or jump style kit, I heavily recommend RB's jump style collection. I'll link it down in the description below. It's completely free and I used a bunch of the sounds from that kit to make this beat. And as always, for these build-up sections, make use of a ton of sound effects. I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's because it works and it's literally essential for these kind of beats to build energy throughout your tracks. So that being said, this is what this build-up portion making use of those hardstyle kicks sounds like. now that we've covered the various subgenres of EDM that Jane Remover makes use of in her production, I want to cover her use of halftime breakdowns. Now, these beats are very upbeat and up-tempo, but having something like a halftime breakdown can really switch the energy of a track. And this is something that she makes use of in Dancing with Your Eyes Closed. Now, this section of the beat is more along the lines of like dubstep, which isn't really played around with a lot in the album, but that's what's great about Jane Remover's production. It's not really encapsulated in one specific style. I feel like a dubstep drop or some other kind of drop making use of another EDM subgenre could work just because her production is so experimental. But yeah, with that being said, for this section of the beat, instead of having your snare hit 1, 2, 3, 4, you're gonna want it to hit 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and yet again, because it's a halftime section, it's gonna be slowed down. And another thing I did for this section is made use of like 5 or 6 different bass sounds. And yet again, for these basses, I recommend making use of OTT just to make them stand out and pop even more. Now, one thing you're gonna wanna make use of for these halftime sections is the buildup of tension and release. And literally the easiest way you can do that is by taking out certain sections of your drums, building up the tension with some kind of riser, and releasing it with some kind of impact or sound effect. So that being said, if you're making use of a bunch of different bass sounds, having your snares hit at half the speed they're supposed to hit, spamming OTT on literally everything, and making use of tension and release, this is what your halftime portion should sound like. Now that we've covered the halftime portions of her production, I want to get into the final and arguably most important aspect of her production, which is her use of sampled sound effects. And I feel like this is something that kind of sets Jane Remover apart from other people and makes her style much more distinguishable. She makes use of a bunch of popular media or video game sound effects similar to like Core and stuff like that, which if you didn't know, Jane had a little Core side project called Leroy, which I heavily recommend checking out if you haven't already. But yeah, here's a couple sound effects that you can make use of if you want to capture Jane's style. Firstly is the Palkia scream from Pokemon. Secondly is the body scream from that song Bodies. Thirdly is this car crash and siren sound effect. And finally, just scour your drum kits and try to find some kind of unique sampled sound effects throughout them. Like for instance, I have this one from that jump style drum kit I mentioned earlier, which kind of sounds like Danny Brown if I'm being honest. But yeah, you're gonna wanna absolutely spam these sound effects throughout your beats. Just go crazy with them. And that is the final portion of Jane Remover's production that I want to cover. So with that being said, if you're making use of rage sections throughout your beat, integrating various subgenres of EDM like breakcore, dance, and hardstyle, making use of halftime breakdowns, and making use of sampled sound effects from popular media or video games, this is what your final product should sound like. with that being said, that is going to completely cover the genius production of Jane Remover's Revengeseekerz. I really hope you enjoyed today's tutorial and learned something new. If you have any questions, please throw them in the comments down below and I will do my best to answer them. As well as that, consider checking out my Patreon where you can get both the FLP for this beat and the full raw unedited video of me making this beat. That way, if you wanted to study the process it takes to make these kind of beats, the mixing, the mastering, the arrangement, what presets were used, all that kind of stuff, it's right at your fingertips. And finally, consider subscribing as I post one tutorial a week and one sound kit a month. Other than that, it's gonna be it. Peace!